the sinister people behind the door. Let me get this straight from the start. No, I do not believe that my family's house was haunted back then. However, one thing is for sure, no matter what the reason was, something sinister had targeted me during the summer of 2006. It all began during one of those nights, when my 9-year-old self preferred playing with a game handheld with low volume instead of sleeping. At some point around 2 in the morning, my ordeal started out of the blue. I heard the door slowly open and quickly hid the console under my pillow, which literally muted the device as I faked being asleep. With care, I then opened one eye just enough, expecting to see my mother, the single parent of the house, checking on me to ensure I was asleep, but instead, the door just remained partially open. I waited for at least 4 minutes, which felt like forever, thinking she already saw what she needed to while my eyes were closed, and hoping to see her close the door. When I was fed up with waiting, I decided to get out of bed and closed the door silently. However, the moment I approached, the door was violently slammed shut. Later in the morning, by mere fear of snitching on myself, I avoided mentioning any of it to my mother, expecting she would then assume that I was awake the whole time. I went about my day, doing what kids do, and during the night, I was back to business with the game handheld. Once again, around 2 in the morning, the door slowly opened. Well, Josh, you know the routine, I thought, confident in executing the usual choreography to deceive my mother. Once again, I opened one eye and the door was partially open with no other particular activity. Annoyed, because I did not want to walk to the door like the night before, I called, "Mommy?" Faking a sleepy and tired voice to the best of my ability, but got no response the first time. "Mom?" I insisted more convincingly after a few seconds. The nonverbal response I obtained covered me with shivers. 4 fingers, white like snow, appeared as an unknown hand gripped the top of the door, the way a person would do to hold it open. They were almost glowing in the dark, almost fluorescent. Was it a glove? No, because I could glimpse the dark color of the nails contrasting with the fingers. They remained there, no movement, nobody taking a look or fully coming in the room. "Mom, is that you?" I asked, hesitantly. How could it be her? I knew for a fact that my mom had a personal reason for never painting her nails, so they were never that dark. I called again, worried at this point, and in response, a second set of 4 similar fingers appeared at the very bottom of the door, as the intruder unnaturally gripped the door with his other hand, I assumed. I began hyperventilating, mustering the strength to scream for my mother at this point, but when I tried, only a whimper came out of my mouth instead. In response, a third set of 4 similar fingers appeared in the middle of the door near the handle. "Mommy?" I heard multiple people say at the same time, at least, this is how I can describe what I heard. It was as if they miserably tried to imitate me, frightening me instead. I just screamed. The 3 hands quickly retreated behind the door, which was then violently slammed shut by the intruders. A few seconds later, my mother stormed inside the room. She just reassured me that it was nothing and opted for me to sleep beside her in the main bedroom. Nothing else happened that night, and having my mother with me meant no more furtive nocturnal gaming, but at least 100% safety. How wrong I was. About 2 days later, I was peacefully sleeping one night, with my back glued to my mother's chest and belly, when I was suddenly awakened by a strange noise. I opened my eyes and immediately looked at the door from where I was, without moving an inch, and witnessed a vision of horror. The fingers were there, the hands were back, but that time, there were around 10 hands, and thus countless fingers tapping on the door with the tips of their nails, the way some people casually do on a table when they wait for something. "Mom," I whispered, trying to notify her without alerting the intruders. "Mom, wake up," I insisted, discreetly tapping her thigh with my hand. Her response froze my whole being. "SSH. Just ignore it, Josh, sleep," she said, before placing her arm over my body to reassure me. Instead, what I saw mortified me to the point that I could no longer make any sound. The arm that covered me was as white as snow, with dark nails at the end of each of its fingers. Paralyzed with terror, I remained still, trembling to the core and letting tears of fear just streaming from my eyes. I remained there, the whole night, and to this day, I do not know how I fell asleep, but I did. The next morning, I woke up to my mom getting ready for work as if nothing strange happened. Was it really my mom? Was my own mother part of the intruders? I guess we will never know. We did not talk about it at the time and never did since. I requested to go back to my room the same day and opted for barricading my door every night. To this day, I still do so, no matter what building or room I spend the night into, and nobody understands why. I know that I have to. Why? Because every night, I can still hear the faint tapping of multiple fingers on the door. Sometimes, they even knock, but never say anything other than that distorted "mommy" for whatever reason. I just know that I should never come face to face with the sinister people behind the door. My fiancé's brother. Amy is the best woman a man could ask for. She has beauty, charisma, personality, everything, and I loved her for that. She was magnificent, and I couldn't stop fantasizing about her. No matter where I was, at the supermarket, at work, or driving home, I always pictured her amazing figure and captivating face. However, there was one small issue. Amy's brother. Brendan. Brendan was just like his sister, with all the amazing traits Amy had, only he had this monotone voice that felt so dry and bland. But besides that, he was just so off-putting, like there was something utterly wrong with him, and he was hiding that wrongness to blend right into the crowd. Yet before I could figure it out, I noticed Amy started to behave strangely. She became more jumpy, paranoid, and careful of her surroundings. I tried asking her what was wrong, but she never told me. Her paranoia started to grow worse, and our relationship was beginning to crack because of it. I started to suspect that Brendan was behind Amy's sudden silence, and my suspicion only fueled my distrust of Brendan. However, when I mentioned Brendan, she winced at his name being said and promptly became silent. Eventually, Amy told me about what was troubling her, a stalker. Apparently he was sending unnerving voicemails and text messages saying how she was his and his alone, and how cute she would look if she was chained up in his basement. I was appalled, fuming, and horrified all at once. How dare he say that to my precious Amy? How dare he frighten her like that? How dare he do this to her? I had to put a stop to it once and for all. I asked Amy who was doing this, and after a few minutes of hesitation, she provided a name. I drove to his house and got out of my car. I checked my pocket for my knife. Yep, it was there. It took me a while to find him. The police weren't very helpful, so I had to take matters into my own hands. Suddenly, a car pulled up next to me and the driver got out. Brendan. I was confused, but then my mind put the pieces together. I smiled and held my hand out. Brendan hesitated for a second before shaking it and smiling right back at me. I noticed the hammer and duct tape he held, and my smile widened. It looked like he came prepared, too. I have some other tools in my trunk for him. Mind helping me bring some of them with me? Brendan asked. I instantly obliged, and he opened it, so I took out a power drill. Brendan took out a butcher knife. We both showed our weapons of choice and smiled at each other again. Then we set off to deal with the man scaring our dear Amy. Glass Man. This all started about 2 weeks ago. I was in my room, lying on my bed and watching TikTok videos. It was around 4 in the morning, and my sleep schedule was pretty messed up. I had a glass of water on my dresser, and the reflection on the glass was creating some really creepy shapes. To put my mind at ease, I moved everything on the dresser away from the glass of water, thinking it might be the other objects causing the strange reflections. I looked at the glass one more time to reassure myself, and the only reflection I saw was my own. I went back to watching TikTok videos on my bed and turned to face the wall, but I still felt really uncomfortable and creeped out. I figured I was just scaring myself. When I turned back around, I caught a quick glimpse of a tall man's reflection in the glass. I bolted out of the room and decided to sleep downstairs with my dog. The next day, I went back up to my room. Nobody was there. However, the glass was in the middle of my bedroom floor and it was still filled to the top. I asked my mom, dad, and sisters if they had touched it, but they all said they hadn't. I was scared to go into my room at night. Luckily for me, one of my sisters was staying at her boyfriend's for a few days, so I slept in her room with my other sister. They share a room. Their room is next to mine, and all night, you could hear strange noises coming from my bedroom. The guilt marketplace. It came in a vial by mail. There was an injection kit but no instructions. The instructions were on the dark website, the guilt marketplace. The first time Alex had done it, he'd used a belt, located a vein on his forearm and injected the entire liquid at once. That was what the instructions said you had to do to get paid. It was only theft, but the hit had been hard, like being hugged by someone made of razor blades. The pain lingered for weeks. But the BTC showed up in his wallet as promised. It helped Alex survive. He started doing it regularly after that. Quit his job and did guilt. The website concept was simple. If you felt guilty about something, anything, you could auction off that guilt, or a fraction of it, to one or more bidders who'd suffer it for you. The transactions were anonymous. The reasons for the guilt had to be described, but it didn't matter what they were. If someone was willing to take it, the marketplace facilitated the transaction. Alex had started light but eventually moved on to more lucrative, harder stuff. When he took his first murder guilt, January 25th he thought he'd die, but he didn't, and the BTC arrived. Then Alex met Angie. She was a fellow student, and he introduced her to the marketplace, starting her off gently but introducing her systematically to harder and harder hits. Angie was good at suffering, better even than he was, and she did it all, tiny fractions of even the most heinous acts. The combined income was good. One day, Angie saw a marketplace listing for something absolutely putrid. Despicable. Abuse and cruelty that was almost unimaginable. Total pot, $25 million. We should take it all. Each do half, she suggested. I couldn't live with myself, said Alex. He meant it. They'd spent the last few weeks trying to game the system, but it seemed impossible. The market was truly free, self-regulating. If you took for $X, you could only resell for $X. That was market value. No gain. Angie completed the $25 million transaction anyway. When the vial arrived, she switched labels and watched Alex inject with what he believed was mere assault. The hit destroyed him. Angie watched him writhe on the floor, muscles tight to the point of snapping, foaming at the mouth, unable to speak as he experienced guilt he was not prepared for. That nobody could be prepared for. Then she brought him a knife. It couldn't be murder, she'd decided. It had to be suicide. So she put the knife in his hand and encouraged him to kill himself. Finally, he slit his own throat. Then, feeling her guilt begin to rise, she put it up for auction on the marketplace. There were takers. Total pot, $10 million. Only a few days, she told herself. And she suffered horribly, but then the pain was lifted and she was free. She had gamed the system. She had successfully laundered guilt. Were our camping neighbors trying to kill us? I'm pretty sure we were involved in some weird couple's killing spree last night. Me and my boyfriend's family are big campers. We try to go as often as possible and try finding different places depending on the weather and season. We booked a beautiful spot on the lake and had been anticipating this trip for months. Imagine our shock when we get to our site, when we discover that the lake has flooded most of the campsite with the exception of ours, one next to it and then one about 100 feet away. We didn't get to enjoy the lake because there was no beach access and the water was not safe. We shrugged it off and set up our campsite as usual. At about 7 p.m. we see a car pull into the campsite right next to ours. No big deal, we just go about our night. I noticed that they were not in a hurry to set up camp. A middle-aged man and woman got out of the car. I'm a very observant and paranoid person, so I notice details that most people may not think anything of. In my mind, these campers arrive really late after check-in and don't unload anything from the car. They didn't talk to each other and they kind of just looked into our site in passing. Okay, no big deal, I think. A bad storm hit us a few hours later and we were literally holding down our tents while the couple next to us just sat in their car. No tent. I still thought this was odd, but my boyfriend said they probably were car campers and had the back set up to sleep in. Okay, makes sense I guess, but still, why come to a tent campground? We go to sleep and all is well, until I'm awakened but the sound of footprints in our vicinity. We had been drinking, so the fact that this noise woke me up means it was very close to our tent. I spring up and listen. I heard people walking up to our tent and saw the silhouette of a man through my tent. In a state of panic, I unzip the tent and look outside. Two people with red headband flashlights are standing about 7 feet from me. I rush myself back into the tent and grab my pepper spray air pistol. During all of this, my boyfriend wakes up asking me why I opened the tent, and I explain what I just saw. His reasoning is that it was the neighbors just gathering firewood and I can't shoot them for that. Immediately the people walk away and we hear silence. I take a moment to think that maybe I'm being paranoid and am also a little hungover. I try going back to bed but can barely sleep. The next morning we wake up and the couple next to us has what looked like a tarp tied from one tree to another. I'm thinking, WTF is that? I notice that the man has the same khaki long pants he had on the night prior and the woman also wearing the same clothes. This in itself isn't weird while camping, but what was weird is that they were not dressed for camping. It's hot and the clothes they were wearing were not what you would wear in this environment. Long pants. Almost like to protect you when going through the woods to hijack another site is what I thought. We go about the day and I keep noticing that the couple doesn't seem to interact with each other at all. They don't talk and start a fire in the fire pit for lunch, taking it very easy. Me and my boyfriend's family decide that due to the weather and the lake, we would head home early. Well, the couple next to us, who had literally just started a fire, immediately packed up and left just as we started to pack. They left in a hurry. We finish packing and get back to my boyfriend's parents' house and decide to stay for a while. Well, I told my boyfriend's parents about the whole thing and how often weird it was, and what they had to say chilled me to the core. They said that the man upon arrival seemed to be antagonizing the dogs. They have a Rottweiler mix and a pit mix, to see how they would react. They weren't sure why he took this stance, but after me telling them this, we put our stories together. They pointed out how he would stand and stare at the dogs, while the woman was acting busy doing absolutely nothing but just moving around. Then they pointed out that the campers sat facing our campsite and not the lake. They also noticed that there was minimal interaction between them and just seemed to stare at us. They said one of the dogs would growl occasionally throughout the night and they didn't get much rest. When I brought up that my boyfriend said that they were probably just getting firewood, they both said, why would they go out of their way to collect firewood that has been heavily rained on? Also, why wait till we go to sleep, and then pack up the next day and leave? So this is what I think. I think these people were locals who knew the condition of the campsite and scoped it out. They noticed our site was reversed and isolated. No one else there but us and them, and some others campers pretty far apart. I think they camped out to either rob us or murder us. But then heard my BF say something about not shooting them, not knowing it was a pepper spray air gun, and backed off. Then spent the afternoon observing us until they saw us leaving and decided to call it off. Because none of their behavior makes sense. Am I crazy? I love my mother. I enjoyed walking along the pier. I enjoyed seeing the pink Chablis colored petals as they fell into the river. I enjoyed strolling with my friends and laughing. I enjoyed all the good things in life when it came to the pier. My favorite spot in the world was where I'd do something I'd regret the rest of my life. Maybe I don't regret it. Maybe I just can't fight the guilt. Maybe I need to reflect. But I can't and I won't. No. I don't regret it. I don't regret what I did to her. If anything, I'm proud of it. Ally, the girl who nobody ever talked to. The girl I decided to give a chance to. I regret that part. But I don't regret what I did. Her face is all a blur to me now, but there is one thing that I vividly remember. The small silver charm from her bracelet that fell off of her wrist after I pummeled the knife into her stomach. Let me give you some backstory. I was walking home from school, wearing my gray flannel shirt over top of my white t-shirt and dark blue jeans. She came up to me and started making small talk. I didn't even want to acknowledge her presence, but what would happen to my reputation? I was tolerating her presence and walking along the pier as I always did. There was a whirlwind of topics spitting out of her mouth. All I wanted to do was shut her up. Forever. And I did. I always carried a Texas rose pocket knife with me. My mom got it for me when I was younger. She used to always say to me, "Cyrus, only use this when in need, especially during those magic moments." I say used to because now she's in prison for murdering my father. What my mother had told me replayed in my mind while I was walking with Ally. This was a magic moment. And I used it to my advantage. We were near the river. It was time. I tackled her over the fence, letting us roll down to the riverbank. I smiled psychotically, at least that's what a bystander said. I used this moment. I pulled the knife out of my pocket and pinned her hands down, sawing off each of her fingers and listening to her scream. "Shut up, shut up, shut up, shut up, shut up," I kept repeating to her. All I wanted was for her to shut up. And I made her. I jabbed the knife into her stomach over and over and over again. Her blood squirted all over my body and hers. It reminded me of the rum raisin wine that my mom used to buy. Over and over again, I let her body deteriorate. Her flesh was practically melting in my hands as I stabbed her. She would shut up. Forever. Looking back on it, I don't regret a damn thing. I honored my mother. That's all that matters. I love you, Mom. Hanging Amelia. Me and my mother have moved around a lot. When I was 8, my father was a drunk and didn't contribute to much from what I remember and was never home, so Mom and me decided to move on from him. They never married, so there were no strings attached. We left when I was around 7, so we shuffled from place to place for a few years till finally Mom landed a good job and was able to afford a small apartment. It was a small place, but still not so bad. We made it a home after having to paint the walls and a few other small minor adjustments approved by the landlord, which have us a reduced rent, so things were going good for us. We met a few of the neighbors in the same building who were mainly made up of old people, but very nice people, always helpful and kind. Sometimes they'd invite us for dinner, which was nice since at times we never really had anything to eat, so it was a nice gesture. I was adjusting to having my own room at that age, and I had all my toys and such piled and stacked in the corner and my bed right by a wide open window. Mom didn't trust me enough to have this big window and was always afraid I'd fall right out, but even I knew I wasn't stupid enough to fall 3 stories down from playing. The first few nights were rough cause I felt uneasy for some reason. I always felt like someone was watching me, and because of the hot summer nights I'd have my window open to let some air in. Laying by that window was eerie for whatever reason, but I always did my best to ignore it. I figured I was just adjusting, as Mom would always say. By the first week of having my own room and space, I kept seeing my things in places I'd never leave them, some toys knocked over and a few picture frames dropped from my wall. I never mentioned it Mom cause I didn't want to give her a reason get me out of the room, so I never spoke about it. One night as I was tossing and turning from the hot summer wind blowing in from outside, I turned to my right and I felt something brush up against my face. I kept swatting away thinking it was a bug, but when I opened my eyes all I could see is a pair of feet with a long flowing white dress. I gasped out of fear and I closed my eyes in a panic. When I removed my hands, What I had seen was gone. I kept trying to convince myself that I was dreaming, but I knew what I had seen and Mom for sure wouldn't have believed me. That next night I slept on the floor in the hopes that I wouldn't see what I seen that previous night. As I was reading a comic book with a flashlight under my blanket, I felt a strong gust of wind blowing in from the outside which blew my blanket off my head. As I crawled chasing my thin blanket on the floor, I could see a shadow on the floor streaming in from the moonlight. I suddenly had the chills, the small hairs on my arms stood on end and I felt a sudden coldness in the air. Slowly I turned towards the window and at the corner of my eye, I can see it again, but this time. The feet with the dress were rocking with the wind. I could hear the rope creaking under the weight. I opened my eyes, but not looking at it directly, and could see the feet slightly kicking. I began to whimper, whispering, "Go away, go away." I began to cry softly, knowing full well it was some kind of a ghost. The feet started kicking a bit more as I covered my ears to keep from hearing that rope crackling. A soft choking sound along with what sounded like bones snapping filled my bedroom, and finally that's when I cracked. I yelled, "M.O.M. Mommy," and in a few seconds she burst through the door and stood at the doorway. "Oh my God." And quickly she G-E'd me from off the floor and we both ran upstairs to the neighbors. She thought that maybe the little old woman hung herself out the window, but that wasn't the case. After banging at the upstairs neighbor's door for a few minutes, the little old woman answers the door as her husband stands behind her. My mother explained what they had seen and they both came downstairs and into my bedroom, but when they all looked, nothing was there. The woman looked distraught with obvious signs of stress and had to leave. The old man just sighed and looked at my mom. "Sorry about that, that's Amelia. She does pop up here once in a while." We moved shortly after that once incident, but before we did, we got to find out who Amelia was. She was the sister of the upstairs neighbors. She hung herself from her window, which was right above my room, because she found out her husband was cheating on her. Her sister later moved into her apartment in order to keep her things for a keepsake. Amelia always appears and had been chasing away previous tenants. It's been going on for years since then, and I'm sure it's still been happening. I'm an adult now and sometimes I do pass by the old apartment and see the apartment still empty. Some years I'd see a light or two on, meaning someone had been living there at some point, but it never lasts. What really gets me though, after all these years, after how long, and I wonder why does Amelia